like to welcome all of you to this Yom Kippur service. Those of you here with us in the sanctuary, those who have joined us on YouTube, Zoom, or Facebook. Like Moses in our Torah portion for this morning, addressing all Israel as he stands on the banks of the river Jordan. Atem nitzavim hayom, kulechem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. You stand this day, all of you, before the Eternal One, your God. This has been our twice-weekly welcome to all of you who have been part of our service over the past 2.5 years. In our words, we have attempted to ensure that all of you, here in the sanctuary or online, whether joining us in real time or at some future moment in time when Shabbat or Yom Kippur catches up with you, wherever you are in the world. It may feel that we are back in a space and time we inhabited 3 years ago in 2019, before COVID-19 became not only a threat, but a scythe that swept through families and communities, killing 207,000 people in the UK and 6.5 million worldwide. And in some senses, we here at the LJS are back. Services, music, activities, Rimon Religion School, our nursery school, which has bravely just undergone an Ofsted inspection right in the middle of these high holy days. But in another sense, there is much that is different. The technology that you see around you here in the sanctuary, indeed now all over the building, including our owls. You'll have to ask Rabbi Igor what an owl is. Many of our adult education classes are for the most part online or hybrid, as many of the new members who have joined us over the past 2 years and no doubt are watching online today are not local, but live many miles away, some even overseas. And then there has been the cost of closing down a large institution like ours for several months, operating under severe restrictions, when only few in number could attend services, when musicians recorded music separately for those services from home so that we could embed them in our presentations. This was not necessarily a financial cost, although there has been that as well. There were times when only Rabbi Igor and I would be in the synagogue, trying to imagine an invisible congregation somewhere out there beyond the cameras, reaching out to each individual who sat alone or with family to pray with us. There were months of wearing masks and of going home without being able to socialize or share a kiddush together. One of the most difficult aspects of COVID for families and for rabbis were the constraints imposed on our pastoral work, a key part of our rabbinic vocation, not being able to visit people in hospital or at home, not being able to conduct Shiva prayers in the home or the synagogue, but on Zoom only. The terrible times for families and individuals of standing round a grave, 10 people at the most, each household separated by a distance of 6 feet. Every restriction went against the natural, emotional, psychological processes that are so necessary at a time of bereavement. Hospitals are still reluctant to admit visitors, although nursing homes now acknowledge the need for their residents to stay in touch with the outside world. The toll of these past 2 years and more, I think, are still catching up with us. For all of us, the strain has been immense. It has changed the way we are and changed the way we do things. We are in the midst of major transitions, I believe, not knowing whether to revert to what we had before or whether to take courage and review what we should be doing in the future. We are at a halfway house, in recovery, but not yet free from the more recent disordered and painful past. One of those changes this year is this double act that Rabbi Igor and I are offering you this morning. I am really the warm-up part of the act, without the laughs, I'm afraid. The more intellectual and thoughtful part on the subject of collective responsibility you will hear in a few moments. If there is one thing that religion has provided at important moments in history, it is community, a sense of collective responsibility for each other. Community is a counter to social dislocation. It is sometimes, in the companionship and connections it offers, a balm for trauma and grief. It brings people face to face with each other from different countries and cultures, languages, races, and ages. It helps to create relationships and a profound sense of belonging. I grew up here in this community, and more than any other place, I think, I learned what it means to have a sense of that collective responsibility. It was about turning up for events and services, not simply because I had to, but because there was always something new to learn, different people to meet, stories to hear. I learnt an almost Calvinist ethic of hard work from my parents, and from the community I derived that strong connection between Jewish teachings and morality. Torah, rooted in our history, in other times and other places, with its powerful messages of loving one's neighbor, loving the stranger in our midst, stretching out our hands to the poor and needy, taking the homeless into our homes, caring for the most vulnerable in our society, giving tzedakah, and by the way, the leaflets for our Yom Kippur appeal will be with you in a few days, and never taking for granted the precious resources of our planet. All of these places us, in the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in the midst of a collective social order. Morality has always been about the first person plural, about we. Historic transgressions, whether done in the name of the state or in the name of societies or congregations, are not simply wiped out by apologies. The victims of colonialism, slavery, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, prejudice against disability, violence, or any other injustice do not simply disappear. Collective responsibility means bearing the guilt of past transgressions and accepting the imperative to change, to transcend deep and profound prejudices that still exist in us and therefore in our society. As Jews, we have a particular responsibility towards all Israel's citizens, Jewish, Palestinian, Arabs, Druze, Bedouin, asylum seekers and refugees, those who battle against narrow religious rules and outright prejudice, supporting non-governmental organizations such as Physicians for Rights Israel, one of our Yom Kippur Appeal charities, and the many other organizations in Israel and Palestine that work for an end to the occupation, for coexistence and peace, all of this is part of our collective responsibility. Collective responsibility puts community and society at the heart of the moral life. It is not about economics or politics. It is about sharing qualities that have a moral or spiritual dimension. And, says Rabbi Sachs, they have this rare quality that the more we share, the more we have. These are my limited thoughts on collective responsibility. Let us turn to another perspective from Rabbi Igor.
Well, I have to say that I just consider myself as warming down from Rabbi. So what are Jews very good at? And I think that Jews are very good at naming things that went wrong. And this is, by the way, I think that unites Jews and British society as well. There are so many words in Hebrew that mean sin, misdeed, transgression, iniquity, or their synonyms. So many that Vidui, our confession part of Yom Kippur liturgy, managed to use all letters of the Hebrew alphabet while listing them. Let's focus on just a few of them. One of them is chet. It means missing the target, as if one were shooting an arrow, aiming to hit the target, but hitting something else instead. Therefore, the real transgression of chet is the person's lack of intention, mindfulness, or skill when performing a potentially dangerous task. Another word is pesha, a conscious act of rebellion. This category refers to a deliberate breaking of the law. Pesha is committed by somebody who knows that their actions are wrong and should not be done, but they do it anyway. A person who commits avon, the third category, thinks this is the proper way to go and acts accordingly. And avon also refers to a sin someone commits because they've been persuaded that this is the correct way. A good example of such crime is Robin Hood, who robbed the rich and gave to the poor. Another example is people who believe in propaganda and act accordingly. It is this last example of avon that I keep thinking of. 22 weeks ago, the country I was born and raised in, Russia, started a war with Ukraine, the country where my family roots are and where I have so many friends and family members. I'm not the only one who comes to this Yom Kippur with a sense of shame and guilt for not doing enough. Many of us have regrets and things we wish we did differently. Many people share the sense of guilt and shame, and Yom Kippur is the day to face it. Concepts of chet, pesha, and avon can be very helpful in understanding individual guilt. The fact that our tradition distinguishes between different types, different kinds of wrongdoings is really helpful. For example, it can provide a structure for determining what to do with people who were personally involved in misdeeds, who made bad decisions on behalf of others, or who simply followed the orders, and those who played a passive role of an observer. What if you saw something terrible coming and hadn't done enough to stop it? Do I have responsibility to make other people better? Or at least stop them from doing something wrong? The Holiness Code of Leviticus and many other Jewish texts say yes. You do have responsibility for groups you are part of, and not just for your own actions. In the Babylonian Talmud, rabbis established the following rule. Whoever can prevent their household from committing a sin, but does not, is accountable for the sins of their household. If they can prevent their fellow citizens from sin, but do not, they are accountable for fellow citizens. If they could prevent anyone in the whole world from sin, but do not, they are accountable for the sins anywhere in the world. This text promotes radical justice. If you didn't do enough to prevent someone else's sin, it is on you too. Ultimately, all people are responsible for the actions of their fellow citizens and their leaders. When something goes wrong, the decision not to get involved might be a convenient choice, but it can have disastrous consequences. They say that the sense of guilt for not doing something is stronger for doing it. In other words, you might regret your indifference more than a potential mistake in being proactive. In his book, Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel outlined the reasons for his involvement in the peace movement against the war in Vietnam. He found inspiration in teachings of Jewish prophets. He writes, morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. It also became clear to me that in regard to cruelties committed in the name of free society, some are guilty, while all are responsible. I didn't feel guilty as an individual American for the bloodshed in Vietnam, but I felt deeply responsible. There is nobody else who will come and fix your mistakes. Yom Kippur calls us to take responsibility. Some are guilty, and they desire justice, but all of us are responsible for all suffering and injustice in the world. It is not my goal to impose guilt on people for not doing enough. The sense of guilt is too negative. It rarely leads to a good practical result. One must have a positive goal and energy, a motivation to make a difference, responsibility. Guilt is not always useful. Guilt can paralyze. Responsibility is a call to action. Guilt makes you angry at yourself. Responsibility makes you compassionate and compels you to feel the pain of others. Guilt is what you come to synagogue on Yom Kippur with. Responsibility is what you're supposed to take with you when you go out. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. Today's most serious issues are not personal or national. They are collective. The COVID-19 pandemic is a taster and test for all international systems. It is not just a British issue. It is a global concern. Climate change, refugee crisis, other pandemics might be on the way. If we don't take responsibility and start building international collective cooperation systems soon, we will be responsible. In a moment, we will read the prayer expressing the hope that one day God will be one for all the earth. This moment hasn't yet come. God is not the same for all. Our challenges are. Perhaps it is time for us to come together, find a common ground, and accept the greatest challenge of the 21st century, global collective responsibility. It used to be a time when high priest confessed all sins on people's behalf on the Day of Atonement. High priest is not here anymore. We don't have prophets who would give us God's message. We don't have heroes of the past to save us. But we are their children and students. Let us be worthy of their heritage. Now it is time to take responsibility and do what we are good at, naming things that are wrong and doing something to fix it. Gmar Tov.